BMW wants you to believe that this X3 M50 is the ultimate no-compromise machine, a 393 horsepower family crossover that handles like a sports sedan and hauls like a sensible adult. But the real test of that claim isn't a warm, dry canyon road where everything works. It's this, a technically M-tuned chassis, an electronically controlled rear diff, and winter conditions that will tell you exactly how honest BMW's engineering actually is. In this episode, we find out if this M hardware is a driver's tool or a spec sheet dressed up for the occasion. The spec sheet says 393 horsepower and it'll do 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, but what BMW doesn't tell you is that this is tuned to do better than those numbers. This is a mild hybrid, as you know, and the electric motor fills that precise space between your right foot and the turbo spooling up. The result is that this responds more like a sports car right from zero throttle input. It doesn't build, it arrives every time, like you clicked add to cart on torque. The B58 has powered so many BMWs that it risks becoming furniture. It's technically excellent, but emotionally distant. But here, what changes is that M-specific tuning with that mild hybrid torque overlay. At low engine speeds, it's torquey and civilized, but push it past about 4,000 RPM and it goes from confident executive to something a heck of a lot more urgent. And when it's doing X3 M50 duty, it's an engine that communicates more through G-forces throwing you into the back of the seat than it does through sound. The way the 8-speed automatic works makes manual transmission enthusiasts quietly reconsider their position. Not publicly, quietly, like in the shower. In automatic mode, it reads your inputs and the road so well that you rarely actually want to override it with the manual paddle shifters. In sport mode, it holds gears longer and it also has rev match downshifts that feel intentional so that you know that this was engineered properly. The M Sport differential, that electronically controlled limited slip diff at the rear, is probably the most important piece of hardware in this X3. Normally, we'd find that in a performance car application like the M3 or the M4, for example, but it fundamentally changes the behavior of this X3 on corner exit. Instead of a typical all-wheel drive system's behavior of tightening up the front axle to stabilize the car on corner entry, what this does is it torque vectors torque to the outside rear wheel to help you rotate. It's subtle and unobtrusive in every driving situation. You rarely notice it, but it's not subtle when you're committed to a corner at speed. That's the key feature of the spec sheet doesn't explain adequately. If you look carefully, the downshift paddle also says boost, so it's a dual function switch, and what that boost function is that it completely reorganizes the entire drivetrain for 10 seconds. Optimal gear, sharpest throttle map, mild hybrid assist, all active simultaneously. Then it quietly returns to your previous drive mode when the timer runs out, as if you never asked. Like I said, BMW says 393 horsepower and 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, but they're being modest because there's nothing like experiencing this 4,500-pound SUV launch from a standing start. Subscribers get notified when new episodes drop on this channel. Non-subscribers hope the algorithm will show it to them eventually. And if you want to control when you see our episodes on YouTube, well, that's what the subscribe button does. Steering's variable ratio, variable assist, every qualifier that BMW has in its arsenal, which is ultimately code for we prioritized ease over communication. On-center feel is strong, it weights up nicely in the corners, and it is precise. What it lacks is some texture or some feedback, and there's very little communication that comes through the steering wheel that lets you know what's going on at those two front contact patches. That kind of feedback you have to get through the chassis. You always know that you're driving this precisely in the corners, you're just not having a conversation with it. It's more email than phone call. And that distinction matters more than you think because this is the kind of SUV that invites you to push. it is a blast in the corners. Does exactly what I want it to do. Steering is very, very precise here. The corners is really where this X3 M50 comes together. It is very happy in the corners, pulling out of the corner, a little off camber there, no trouble at all. This road is not smooth. Body and wheel control is simply excellent. For me, the biggest difference between this M50 and other X3s is the big brake package. They're massive 4-piston calipers at the front, and you can't miss them peeking out behind these black winter wheels. Bite is strong. You've got precise modulation of the brakes anywhere in pedal travel, and if you do ever find yourself into ABS, well, the intervention is very, very subtle. I've had the opportunity to enjoy this several times on some interesting roads, and brake fade's basically non-existent with this setup. Admittedly, I'm very picky when it comes to brake pedals, and what I'd like to do is get rid of that first bit of soft initial pedal travel. And when I'm hustling this in the corners, makes a difference. When I'm driving it normally, like normal people do, it actually makes it easier to apply the brakes a little more smoothly, and your passengers will definitely appreciate that. During my time with this X3, the adaptive dampers are working overtime. Not only do they have to manage my driving, they also have to manage 4,500 pounds of mass and this end of winter pockmarked, broken, uneven road surface. And they do an incredible job. And to be fair, I don't think they were engineered for doing all of these things simultaneously. What we can't fully account for here is that this particular X3 M50 arrived on 21s. We are on a 20-inch winter wheel and tire setup, so these tires are doing some of the compliance work that the adaptive dampers would have to do otherwise. And as dampers like this get more advanced, their ability to control body roll is impressive. And body roll here is minimal. Definitely impressive. Not impressive for a crossover, but just impressive in general. The rear suspension has M-specific elastokinematics, which is a fancy way for BMW to say that the rear geometry changes to ensure that that rear axle stays planted when you're hustling this through the corners. And all I know is that it works, because this thing feels incredibly planted when I'm rocketing out of corners. If you want to support the channel beyond just watching, well, the merch store is open, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this and less time worrying about manufacturer blacklists. No pressure, just an option. The basic seating position in this X3 M50 is low for a crossover, not sedan low, but it positions you properly so you do have great visibility. This flat bottom steering wheel, still not a fan, but it adjusts for reach generously as well as height, and the pedal placement is absolutely perfect. And it's these touches that make you realize that BMW still builds cars for drivers, because I've got a wonderful interface to this X3. Forward visibility is excellent, large outboard mirrors, decent view out the rear view mirror, and if you're the shoulder checking kind of driver, well, those B and C pillars might get in the way, but as we know, blind spots aren't real. Plus, there are cameras here for your parking lot adventures. It still comes up in my research that this toggle-style shifter is the most controversial piece of the driver interface in modern BMWs. And I've driven enough of them that this becomes second nature. Now, I understand why they do that. It creates more space here instead of having a traditional large shifter on top of the console. There's still the iDrive controller here, and I haven't touched it once because this is a touch screen, and I'm still uncertain why there's this redundancy. There's volume controls here on the center console as well as on the steering wheel, but the climate controls have migrated into the infotainment system screen. On the other hand, they have made it easy for us humans, and you've got simple temperature controls accessible right here, as well as controls for your seat heating and ventilation and the heated steering wheel. Now, at this price point, I do have to say that the materials in here are on point, especially this BMW individual leather. It's a legitimate step up from the base Veganza upholstery, that's for sure. And this upholstered dashboard actually feels durable and very well considered. I suppose if you look closely enough at the lower portions of the dashboard, the lower portions of the door cards, you're going to find the same plastics that they use in the entry-level X3. But they don't feel inexpensive, and I think BMW has achieved parts bin parity. I'm still on the fence about this center console basin, and at first use it all makes sense, but after living with this for a few days, it does become a little confusing. It's spacious enough for a couple of phones, a couple of cup holders, but what ends up happening is you end up putting more stuff in there because it's this open bin and it just attracts all of your daily carry items. Spaciousness in the front seat is generous, even in the second row. Although this is an X3, it's still on the smaller side. It's not an X5 or an X7. What's really useful is the increased amount of cargo carrying capacity over the previous X3. It is very generous back there. Normally, I drive everything with Apple CarPlay rolling, but the one feature in this navigation system that's genuinely useful is the augmented reality overlay, and it works exceptionally well, especially if you're driving in an area where you're not so familiar with the roads. On its first level of interface, iDrive 9's perhaps a little easier to navigate than the previous system. What's a little less exciting is that the deeper functions are now actually deeper, and if you live on CarPlay like I do, that's completely irrelevant. If you do use BMW's native navigation, and there are plenty of reasons to choose it over Waze or Google Maps or whatever you prefer, just keep in mind the learning curve is a bit real. The like button tells YouTube to share this episode with more people like you interested in an episode like this, and if this video gave you more information than a brochure or a press release, well, that's the entire ask. That's what it feels like after a week behind the wheel. Here's what it feels like after a year, according to the people who've been living with it. This starts with good news. Owners who switched from the previous M40i consistently report better real-world fuel consumption. Multiple owners confirmed 30-plus miles per gallon on the highway, with one owner in cold weather reporting 35 from a 393 horsepower turbocharged crossover. That's the mild hybrid doing the real work, not just satisfying the regulators. Now, the things your dealer won't voluntarily disclose. First, that panoramic sunroof does not open at all. It's fixed glass. Multiple owners discovered this at delivery. BMW didn't exactly announce the change. Panoramic glass roof is technically accurate, it just doesn't ventilate. Second, and this one is specifically for Canadian buyers, the adaptive M suspension is standard in the US, but a $1,000 option in Canada. It's the same car, just with the good bits behind a polite invoice. The car I'm driving has the adaptive M suspension. A base Canadian M50 at $77,900 does not. A dedicated Bimmer Post thread exists specifically for Canadian owners running the non-adaptive setup because the ownership experience is materially different. Check your build sheet before you sign. Third, the staggered tires, the narrower fronts and the wider rears. And of course, that means you can't rotate tires. With xDrive, BMW allows a maximum 2mm tread depth difference between the front and rear tires before it affects the transfer case. In practice, owners are replacing rear tires well ahead of fronts. Budget accordingly, especially on 21-inch performance rubber. The universal verdict from owners is that the engine and driving dynamics of the X3 M50 earn forgiveness for everything else. If you own one of these or have quality seat time behind the wheel of one of these, let me know in the comments what I got right and what I got wrong, because real-world ownership experiences are much more valuable than anything I can learn in a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. We came in asking if this was an engineering marvel or an expensive identity crisis, and the honest answer is that it's both. BMW will take that as a compliment. The chassis is capable, the M Sport diff changes what this car does on any corner exit, and the drivetrain is better than the numbers suggest. If you want a crossover that'll handle the school run on Monday and make you take the long way home on a Tuesday, this X3 M50 is it. Just don't pretend it's doing it politely. If you want the same utility but prioritize isolation over road feel, well, consider stepping down to the X3 30X Drive with the M Sport package. If maximum steering communication is your priority, the benchmarks in the segment still have the edge. This X3 M50 sits between those things, which is either a compromise or a sweet spot, depending on your commute. And when you think about it, this X3 is quicker than an E36 M3, handles better than sports cars from 10 years ago, and it'll carry a double stroller in the boot. Progress, my friends, has made some strange decisions, and whether we like it or not, we've all signed off on them. That M Sport diff is the feature that most reviewers mention last, but it really should be mentioned first. Everything good and interesting about this chassis traces right back to that diff and what it lets the rear axle do. That's the X3 M50. Subscribe if you enjoyed this. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree. And if you want to support more of these, well, the merch store is open. See you on the next one.